Bye.
Give me just a second to get this up. Okay, so attendance today. Okay, Javier is here. Oscar, I saw was online. Madison said he was going to try to be online. Tristan is here. Skylar. Just a second.
I'm here.
Okay. Let's do it this way. Normally that's supposed to be. Okay, that's weird. Okay, Skylar's here. Colin is here. Wyatt is not. Shandon is here online, correct? I think I saw you. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, Sherwin is here. Jeremiah. Nope. Okay, Shane is online. Christy is here. Arturo is here. Carter is not. Joseph is, and Reese is online. Okay. Excellent. All right. So a couple of things. I do apologize for Monday and the weirdness with the Zoom meeting thing. I'm not sure why that happened. I apologize, but we've got that taken
Maybe
care
it
of.
timed out due to inactivity.
Well, but it was giving me the same message in both of my classes, and I don't know what the deal was. It was weird. But I went back in and rescheduled them, and looks like everything is okay now. So I haven't gotten your case studies graded yet. I am in the process of doing that. I hope to have those done by Friday. Fingers crossed, if not Monday. I might need a weekend. Okay, so let's get started with our lecture for today. And today we are taking a look at the research process. Get that shared. So let's begin by asking the question. The book begins by talking about the concept of paradigms. So what are paradigms? And please, not everybody at once. Tristan. Okay, a paradigm is a belief system, right? It's a perspective through which we perceive the world, right? It is the means by which we attribute beliefs and intents to the actions that we see of others, right? They're trying to help me and that's why they did this thing to me, or they're trying to hurt me and that's why they did it, okay? It's how we perceive the world. It's how we attach meaning to the things that we see. Now, the book says that sometimes paradigms can be, quote, implicit, assumed, and taken for granted. What does the word implicit mean?
Like implied?
It means it's implied, it's unstated, right? So these are things that we believe that we never really say out loud. We don't write these down. We automatically take them for granted, so they're kind of invisible. If that's the case, how can we determine which paradigms are controlling the way we act if they are essentially hidden? What do you think? Arturo, what do you think?
What was the question? Sorry.
Okay.
I got spaced out.
If based on what the textbook says, paradigms are implicit, assumed, and taken for, they're hidden. They're not stuff that's out in our face saying, this is what you think. If that is the case, how can we determine, or how can we figure out what paradigms are controlling us? What paradigms we've accepted?
I think that we, like the way we approach things, I guess.
Well, that is the way we approach things, but how can we figure out, why did I do it that way? Why am I the way I am? How do I answer that question? And I can tell Javier's going, whoa, dude, this is getting way too philosophical for me, man. I'm out. You had these big-eyed look on your face. I'm like, oh. But what do you think? How can we, if these paradigms are the things that pull us one way or another, and kind of help us to interpret what we're seeing, if we haven't intentionally chosen them, how can we figure out what they are? They're pulling the strings. Well, yeah, it's kind of deep, but how can we figure it out? Can we? Are paradigms unknowable?
It's kind of natural, like how you felt that day, like doing it this way.
Okay.
You want to be like aggressive towards it. I don't know.
Well, I'm not saying that there is a specific scientific answer to this question.
Right.
But I'm saying that if we accept the idea that paradigms exist, then we have to accept that they are having an impact unseen on why we do things the way we do, on the way that we interact with other people, and how we perceive their actions. And so one of the first things that I would suggest is that we have to engage in something called self-reflection. Anybody want to interpret what self-reflection is? And no, it's not what, well, I guess you could say it's kind of like looking at yourself in a mirror. It's metaphysical selfies.
Self-reflection is looking at yourself, and the actions that you've taken in your life. So looking at what you've done, what you could have done better, what you did, looking at both the good things that you've done and the bad things that you've done, and what you could have done to improve that.
Okay, so it's evaluating ourselves. It is literally looking at the mirror, but asking ourselves, so what do you think? Why did you do that? What do you believe that would suggest that this is okay or not okay? And then starting to engage in some thought about that. So let me ask you this question. We're talking about the research process in this chapter, correct? So why in the hell are we starting with this concept of paradigms and self-reflection? That's at the very beginning of the chapter. What does this have to do with research? Colin, what do you think? I'll repeat the question. So we're talking about paradigms, we're talking about self-reflection and hidden agendas and things like that. But this is a chapter on research, the research process. Why start with a discussion about paradigms? Where do these intersect? Why are we talking about it? If you're talking, we can't hear you.
He has the bad mic.
Ah, okay. Oscar, would you be willing to help him out?
Yes. So I think paradigms can show what kind of motivations you have for what you're studying. You can look at the thought process of why you chose this topic and how you're going to go about it.
Yes. Part of what paradigms include are the biases that we have. our preconceived attitudes or belief about what is right, what is wrong, and things like that. And in order for us to engage in research, we have to look at anything and everything that can affect how we perform research and how we interpret it. And before we start looking out at our instruments or anything like that, the first place we have to start looking is where? At ourselves. What am I bringing to the experiment that can contaminate the results before I even get started? What implicit bias, what internal biases do I have that are going to affect the way I see what's going on? And the more aware I am of my bias, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, the more I can control for bias. Why would I want to control for bias? What does it mean to control for bias? Let me start there. When we talk about controlling in an experiment, what are we talking about?
Takeover.
What's that?
Takeover.
Nope, it's not takeover.
Something that doesn't change.
I'm trying to establish something that doesn't change. If I'm using a scale, a weight scale, before I start weighing anything, what do I want to do with that scale? I want to set it so that it is at
Carrot.
0, right? It's completely bare, it's completely accurate that it's not weighing anything, right? I'm zeroing it out. I'm controlling for any problems in the scale so that when I measure the weight of something, what's going to happen? It's going to be it's going to be more accurate because I don't have hidden things that are changing the weight, making it higher or lower than it's supposed to be, right? That's what we mean when we say we control for something, is that we anticipate and eliminate anything that's not relevant so that all we're looking at is the weight or the height, right? So for example, when I take my son to go to the doctor and they weigh him and measure him, they make him take off his shoes. Why? Okay, first of all, it affects weight, and second of all, it affects height, right? So I want to control for that by eliminating things that artificially change the result. So what we're talking about here is that we're trying to control the effect of paradigms that we have in our heads already and how that affects us as the researcher, right? Because I can weigh it, but if I already don't believe the scale and I think the scale's off by 5 pounds, what is that going to do? I'm not going to trust the result I get. Even if I've zeroed the scale, if I believe the scale is wrong, even if I've zeroed it out, I'm not going to trust the result. Make sense? That's the impact of paradigms. And that's why they started here. Is because before we can even start talking about research, we have to control ourselves. Or not control ourselves, but control for ourselves. Now, Oscar asks that the book talks about positivism. Right now, that term should be somewhat familiar because what have we already studied in this class? Post-positivism. What happened after positivism? So if somebody want to tell me what positivism is? The belief of positivism, or its attitude about science, is we can only know what we can what? No, well, do is kind of a, in terms of science, we can only know what we can
Prove
measure.
mathematically, right?
Well, if it's something we see, we can measure it, right? So if it is not physically discernible, if it cannot be scientifically measured, we can't do it. We cannot know it. That's positivism. That was a major philosophy in science from the late 1800s to about the early 1940s, 1950s.
But what do you measure though? Measure it how?
Well, it depends. But what they're saying, but the entire concept of positivism is everything, all we can know is what can be concretely touched. So I can touch it, I can taste it, I can smell it, I can see it, I can hear it, I can feel it, right? Those are those five senses. If it isn't measured by one of those five senses, we cannot know, therefore we cannot study. Anything that doesn't fit into those five senses, that automatically goes into religion, art, or philosophy, and it's not part of what we worry about. Okay? So Oscar says, does this mean positivism isn't effective in studying social science? There is so much going on behind the scenes that I couldn't imagine trying to study social behavior under this point of view. What do you think? How would you answer Oscar's question? It's a great question, by the way, Oscar. What do you think? Would positivism as a scientific theory work in the social sciences? And as somebody observed, I am asking a yes-no question, and if I ask a yes-no question, if you answer, I will automatically ask you why. I am glad you're picking up on some of my traits and habits. Anybody? Would positivism even allow for studies like psychology?
I'd probably say no. It wouldn't be effective studying social sciences.
Yeah. And that's the thing is we often hear positivism being referred to as hard science. Can you give me some ideas of what you might think are, and we're not talking about difficulty. What might be some examples of hard sciences? Chemistry, great one.
Wouldn't it be most of the natural sciences?
Most of that's exactly it. This idea that natural science, because it can be what?
It can be proven, you can see it.
It can be observed, it can be measured. Not that it can be proven, right? Because science never really proves anything. It just proves it for now, right? But exactly, the natural sciences. And so for a long time, especially at universities where a lot of science and research is done, there has been this ongoing battle and hostility between social science and natural science. Why? Anybody want to guess? It all gets back to
I'd want to say because social science is something that we as a species have made up. It's not exactly something that you normally see in nature as with socializing, other than like the basic gathering into a group and herds and such.
Okay, I'm gonna disagree. We see social science in nature all the time. We look at pack activity and how packs work in our
subject because
It all has to do with the paradigms that people subscribe to. What can we know and how can we know it? And they have fundamental different beliefs, right, about what we can know. A positivist only believes what? What they can
do.
physically observe and measure, right? Social scientists say, we believe that there are other things that exist that can be examined differently using different thinking and different paradigms. Okay? And this is really important. Now, I say that there's this hostility. That a lot of that is like carryover from when, I'll tell you right now, positivism as a philosophy has really been abandoned by most of the scientific world. This belief that all we can know is what we taste, touch, such like. There's very few people who believe that's absolutely true. But there are quite a few scientists who say, even though I know there are things that we don't measure that are important, I tend to put more emphasis or value on research that does focus on this. And that's where that kind of hostility comes from. And a lot of it comes because the post-positivists, when psychology started up, when sociology really kind of came into power, there were a lot of folks that said that's not real science. Because of this post-positivist, or not post-positivist, this positivist or objective view. All science has to be measurable, they said. And if you can't measure it, it's not really science. It's pseudo or fake science. Okay, does that make sense so far? Okay. Now, the book continues to develop and suggest that on the opposition to positivists, we saw the growth of this other attitude, where some people moved on into subjectivism. Okay, subjectivism meaning what? That's a great question, Mr. Lambert. I really hope you don't ask me to answer it.
Everything is different depending on each individual.
That it is completely subject to the perspective of the individual. So that truth can be interpreted as much by the perspective of the individual as it is by another person. So why would that drive a positivist nuts?
So as I understood it, positivists believe that everything could be proven mathematically. There's only one way of doing it. And
there is an absolute reality, right? So for example, they take great comfort in the idea that what? What would be the answer to this that I just wrote up on the board? Hopefully the folks online can see this.
Unfortunately, we cannot.
Okay. If I wrote up 4 plus 4, and that equals 8, I could ask any one of you to come up, and hopefully if I wrote a mathematical equation, that you would all answer it the exact same, right? Because there's only one way to calculate 4 plus 4. Right? This is the existential comfort of the post-positivist. The idea that I can come up with something where it doesn't matter who, it doesn't matter where, it doesn't matter when, that question, 4 plus 4, should always equal 8. Does personal opinion count or matter in this? No. What about my economic status? How rich or poor I am, does that change the answer to that? No. What about my gender? Does gender affect the answer to this question? No. They love things like math because it strips out any possible paradigm other than this is the right answer, end all, be all. We're finished with the conversation. Scientific mic drop. Okay? However, as we move out of the realm of things like mathematics, we start to realize that the person is as important to the question as the question itself. That's the entire idea of subjectivism. But Schuyler asks that the book identified another group called the critical realists. And he asks the question is, if we view things on a personal bias, we can't see the greater picture because of that personal bias. We can't ever get out of it. Okay? And so critical relativists say that there is some kind of separate, pure realm. That when we talk about, so for example, when I talk about a pencil, I have this specific pencil, correct? Now, is this representative of all pencils? It shares common characteristics with them, but there are various aspects of this pencil that make it imperfect. There are potential defects in the wood. This was probably made by an automated system, right? So there are possible tiny flaws and idiosyncrasies that make this pencil, for example, the way that it's sharpened, the way the paint lies, the way the metal is wrapped around the end of the pencil, how much wear and tear is on the eraser. This automatically is inherent from any other pencil that I ever look at, right? If I'm looking at these two pencils, can you guys see those? Online.
It's just barely focusing on the one pencil.
Yeah, I only see the one.
Okay, I did my best to show it to you. But do you understand the concept that I'm talking about? These two pencils are inherently different from each other. The critical realist would say there is another philosophical pencil. It's something that does not exist in reality, but we're not getting into H.P. Lovecraft and multiple dimension stuff. But there is a perfect, ideal pencil that all of these are simply shades or representations of. There is the perfect chair, the perfect tree, the perfect road, the perfect everything. There is this concept that exists of perfection, of ideal. And the truth is, all we're looking at are representations of it, are attempts to make it. And so we look at the thing as it is, but not as this is the perfect representation of it. So that we can examine those specific slight defects and changes and differences in what can be observed in comparison to what we anticipate to be the ideal or perfect. This comes from Plato, the Greek philosopher. So this concept has been around for a while. But all of this gets into a very important thing, and this is where we get to what Sherwin talked about. The book talks about the concept of ontology and epistemology. Does anybody remember this? Yes, we are getting back into philosophy kind of stuff, and you're going, what does this have to do with science? It has everything to do with it. Ontology basically says, here's what can be known. Okay? Ontology is what can be known. So for a positivist, what would their ontological perspective be? What can be known according to a positivist?
What can be observed?
What can be observed? If it cannot be observed, it cannot exist. That's ontology. What about subjectivists or interpretivists? What is their ontology? What can be known according to a subjectivist or an interpretivist? Let's think back. What do interpretivists believe? You guys just wrote case studies where you had to kind of wrestle with this a little bit. No, not what can be observed. How do things get created? They get created when people interact. The exchange of ideas between people. Things only come into existence when two or more people share a belief of something. Right? My wife and I exist as an us only because we have agreed that that is the way things are. Does that make sense? Okay, so interpretivists or subjectivists believe that things can be known when people agree or interact with each other in relationship to something. Does this make sense? Again, this is really critical because we're trying to decide how can knowledge even, what is knowledge? And it has to do with ontology. What can be known? Then it leads us to the concept of epistemology. If ontology is what can be known, epistemology is how can we know it? Ontology is, and I like how you described this, Sherwin. Ontology sounds like it's all the information in the world. Everything that could be known. Perfect. Okay? Epistemology is how do we know? How can we know it? How can we gain access to it? Okay? Epistemology is how do we measure? How does that information get represented or presented to other people? But there's a last one that wasn't covered in this book, but was covered in the previous text that we read. And that's called axiology. And no, it does not have to do with hatchets. Axiology, if ontology is what can we know, epistemology is how can we know it, axiology is
What's
is
worth
it
knowing?
worth knowing? I can't know everything, so I have to decide what is most important for me to know. So if I have what we call a growth mindset, what would that suggest about my axiology? Has anybody here ever heard the term a growth mindset? Okay, then I'll skip that. But the idea is ontology and epistemology frame the questions we are capable of asking. If I don't believe that I can know things in somebody else's head, then I wouldn't study anything that had to do with the brain other than from a biological perspective. If I believe that we can learn from the interactions of people, then that opens up a whole world of new questions that I can ask. Does this make sense? Now, realistically speaking, do I expect any of you to become professional researchers? Probably not. However, the purpose of taking this class and even discussing these things is that as you become aware of it, you can never get this out of your brain. You can try, but the truth is now that you know this, my hope is you will never be able to look in a mirror again without asking, how do I know I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing? Yes, I'm going to haunt your brain for the rest of your life, Javier. I apologize. Okay? But when we understand these things, it changes how we exist in this world. And this gets to something that Madison was talking about. It's interesting that theories like physics can interact with other theories in other fields. Why do you think that's the case? Why are there so many overlaps and intersections in fields that seem to have nothing to do with each other? Why would English and physics have common ground or conversations?
Because science is understanding the world, whether
Because
it's constructed or objective.
Exactly. Because ontologies and epistemologies interact with each other all the time. The way that one group understands or describes a phenomenon can influence the way that other disciplines do it. I can borrow liberally, meaning freely or commonly, from other fields. To be honest with you, it's the reason I decided to go into English. Because I like talking about business and economics, but I didn't want to study business and economics. I like talking about psychology, but I didn't want to study psychology. So I went into English because I could talk about all of it, but I didn't have to be an expert in any of it. It was great. Again, not because I'm trying to convince any of you to become English majors, okay? But it's this idea that any kind of knowledge will inherently influence all knowledge. And the more we can appreciate that, we don't just say, well, I'm just here to do this thing. Okay, we call that siloing. We are trying to avoid times where we think this knowledge only works in this class. We want to try to spread that knowledge or look at how does that change the way I see other things. Okay? Now, Tristan, you really nicely summed up a concept that we've been talking about, and this gets back at our concepts of epistemology and ontology and that concept of paradigm. We base our interpretations off of our personal experiences. Our outlook will be structured based on how we personally interpret a situation. So, my daughter, when she was about 4 years old, we had good friends. We would take her over with us to visit them all the time, and they had a Cocker Spaniel. Not a very well-trained Cocker Spaniel. Every time we walked in the house, that Cocker Spaniel would run up, jump up, and knock my daughter to the ground and lick her face. She did not enjoy this. Okay, this was not fun, happy, ha, ha, ha. Okay? What do you think happened as we continued to visit with these friends and this dog continued to do this behavior? What would you think would be some of the possible consequences? Tristan?
Your daughter didn't want to go?
My daughter hated going to these friends. Perfect, yes, very accurate. When she realized we were driving there, she'd start crying. Okay? She also developed a very serious aversion to dogs, right? To the point where if we were walking down the street and she saw a dog in a yard, guess what she would do? She'd ask us to walk on the other side of the street. We didn't know the dog. Did it matter? Why not? Because past experience. And this is true all the time. Everything we do is colored, right? Remember that colored perspective concept? The glasses they were talking about? Everything we do is colored by our previous experience. It shapes everything we see. It decides what we can and cannot see. She didn't care that there were dogs that were gentle, well-behaved, quiet. Didn't matter. She saw a dog, she automatically saw Barkley. Right? Yes, an unfortunate name for a dog, but that's what they went with. So, if we accept that we're all wearing these multicolored sunglasses that reflect all of our previous experience with everything else we see, what does that tell us about how we see the world? do we see the world objectively? Do we see the world like a mathematical equation? 4 plus 4 equals 8. Joseph, you say no.
Is it not always the same?
Because it can't be the same. Because none of us wear the same kind of glasses with the same colors. Doesn't matter. We've each had unique experience. Automatically shapes our world in a totally different way. I will never see the world the same way as Sherwin and Joseph do. I never served in the military. But even they do not see the world exactly the same because they served in different branches of the military. Does that shape the way you see things? I have a feeling that a Marine and an Army, what's the correct term here? Army infantryman would see things differently. You've gone to different places, you've interacted with different people, you've had different missions. Again, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, right? Well, hell, how can we ever talk to each other? We can never come to a common understanding about anything. Is that true? Well, it would seem like that's the case, but we still manage to do it. How do we do that? We insert controls. How do we deal with this? We acknowledge and identify potential experience as a researcher. We identify past experiences that are likely to color our opinion. So when we talk about use of force, I might say, as the son of a prosecutor, I have to acknowledge I already have certain attitudes about police and the legal system. Does that disqualify me from having an opinion? No, but it gives you a sense of what my lens is all about. That's a critical aspect of a researcher. It doesn't mean that I can strip that out of my life, but if I acknowledge and identify relevant experiences that color what I've done, it helps other people to appreciate and anticipate strengths or weaknesses of my argument. Okay? Now, we got about 5 minutes left, and I want to spend at least a little bit of time on this image from the textbook. Okay? Because this has a lot to do with what we are going to be doing in the next couple of weeks. We start our research by doing what? By engaging in exploration. We're going to explore the possible issues involved. We're going to do that by asking research questions. What is it that we want to explore? When we identify a phenomenon or some type of observable thing, what do we want to know about it? Okay? Next, what do? We engage in some kind of subtle hint. It's the second red box at the top of the page. I do some kind of a research. We call it a literature review. Okay, what is a literature review? What am I doing there?
You're trying to identify key authors, articles, theories, and finding it in that area.
Okay, if I'm going to say, well, I want to research X, okay, what I want to do when I do literature review is I want to find out what has already been written about X. What do we already know about it? What have other people already discovered? Why do I want to do that before I start doing my research? Or before I start doing my particular research?
Find out if it's been done before.
Number one, I want to find out if it's been done before. What do we already know? What else do I want to do? Perfect, Sharon, by the way. I also want to make sure I know what the crap I'm talking about if anybody comes and says, well, how do you know this? Well, on top of doing my own research, I'm also familiar with all the experts who've already talked about this. I know my crap. That's what you're trying to prove your expertise. You gain expertise by knowing what people have done in the field you want to study. You have to show that you know what's already been done, so that you can have some authority in the field of what you're doing. And what's the last thing I need to identify? The theory. What theory or law would help explain or relate to the experience that I am trying to investigate? So if I want to explain why do two pencils fall at the same rate, what field do you think I'm going to need to study? If I'm explaining why pencils fall.
Physics.
Physics. And so in order for me to talk about physics, I might need to be familiar with physicists. Who are the major physicists? Okay, so I might need to look at some of the stuff that Newton wrote. I might need to look at stuff that Einstein wrote. Might need to look at stuff that Stephen Hawking wrote. Now, they all didn't work on gravity. I am not studying that field. But do you know what I mean? If I want to talk about physics and I don't know who Isaac Newton is, are you going to care what I have to say? Probably not, because I don't believe that you know what you're talking about if you can't name the significant people and what they said about things, right? It's true anywhere. If you're going to try to tell me what my life was like, you better know who the big people in my life were at the time you're wanting to investigate. If you cannot tell me who my mom was and who my dad is and who my brothers and sisters are, I'm sorry. You're not going to have an opinion. But if you grew up and you knew them, that increases your odds of being able to talk intelligently about the topic, right? Okay. Now, I've run out of time, once again. But here's what I want to tell you just really quickly. For the research proposal that we are going to do, we are going to do these 6 elements, the top 6. You're going to identify research questions. You are going to do a very brief literature review. You're going to identify a theory. You're going to tell me how you would operationalize or measure whatever it is you want to study, how you would do the study, and who would be involved. This is it. These top 6. We aren't doing anything below that blue box right there in the middle of the screen. Yes. What? This is going to be the final project. We're going to have another week of reading, and then we're going to launch right into this.
So next week, then.
We're going to be doing this. We got one more week of reading, and then you're going to be working on these 6 things until the end of the semester, until Thanksgiving. And we're going to do it just like we did with the case study. You're going to be coming in. You're going to be working on your research question section. Once I sign off on that, you're going to do your lit review. Once I sign off on that, you're going to move to your theory. Once you've got that signed off, you're going to do these. Okay? Does that make sense? And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what these are, but that's kind of where the fundamentals of this is. Okay? All right. I apologize for going so late. I really wanted to give you guys some time to ask questions, but I apologize. That's everything we have for today. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you on Friday.